Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Paul, I want to thank you for doing this with us tonight, for being here, and welcome home to Seattle.
Thanks. It's great to be in front of a local crowd. Thanks, everybody.
I'd like to start with a question that I know is on the minds of almost every person in this room, particularly given the events of the past few weeks. And Paul, it involves a relationship that I know is very important to you. It's a relationship that's had many ups and downs over the years, many triumphs and challenges, and currently faces an uncertain future. So I just want to get this question out of the way right off the bat. Is Matt Hasselbeck coming back to the Hawks next year? Well, you were thinking something else?
That's a very good question, but obviously we're kind of in no man's land in the labor dispute right now. So when that's over, I'm sure we'll talk to Matt and his agent again. But there's nothing resolved at this point.
That's great. I didn't actually expect a serious answer to that. I hope.
I thought this was supposed to be serious.
I hope there's some sports reporters in the audience that got that. Paul, at the end of Idea Man, you described the book as one of the hardest things that you've done in your life, which is actually a pretty remarkable statement. What did you learn about yourself through the process of writing this book?
Well, it was an interesting process. I'd always intended to do a book at some point, just going through my career in technology and the amazing spectrum of opportunities I've had and the things I've been able to pursue. But when I got sick in October, November of 2009, I just it was time to do it because I wasn't sure I'd be able to finish it. So I would, working on the book, I would get up each day and try to get down some of my thoughts, and it helped me get the process of doing that helped me get through each day and was stimulated my brain but when you do something like this, there's a real revisiting of both the ups and downs of your life, and there's definitely some peak moments and some moments of where things happen that weren't necessarily what you hoped for, or were tough, or you had to make tough decisions. And so some of those moments, when you revisit them, and especially you go back over them over and over again, because another thing that happened is my background in computer programming in a certain way was re-energized in terms of the editing of the book. I edited every word in the book 8 times. And I remember that I'm kind of a stickler for exactness. And so when you go over those tough moments, after 8 times, you just don't want to do it much more. But it was very rewarding. It was very rewarding to do it.
This book received a lot of coverage in the media prior to its release. In fact, it's somewhat ironic. I think one of the advantages of telling your own story usually is that you get to tell your own story, but in some ways that didn't happen in this case. For those who are just getting the book, who may have read some of the media coverage or the excerpts, what messages do you hope they actually take away from the real book and what you've written here?
Well, there's definitely a story of growing up here in Seattle and those exciting days and first getting exposed to computers and music, and then the period of entrepreneurship that started a little bit before Microsoft and went through my departure in 1983, and then all the amazing things that have happened since then, being involved with sports teams and obviously locally the Seahawks and just an amazing set of things. And I felt like putting a chapter on adventures, some of the adventures I've been able to experience. So it's probably more wide-ranging in its nature than most autobiographical books that you're going to read. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of it.
Certainly those are the facts of the book, and I think it's also fair to say that your life is more wide-ranging than the average person who might be writing an autobiography. What is the message that you hope people come away with about your life and the general impression that they have about you after reading this book?
Well, I'm someone that I basically get very, very excited about the creative process and creating things and having ideas. And when you see those ideas realized, it's just a wonderfully rewarding thing. So obviously being fortunate to be involved in the birth of Microsoft, and then recently things like the Brain Institute, those are amazingly rewarding things that carry on a certain legacy that I'm very proud of. And then of course there's parts where things are more challenging and you make mistakes. And so I hope people, when they read the book, can take away some lessons from my mistakes and ups and downs over the years too. But basically, I hope they get a sense of me as a person who's creative, and then maybe you can think about creative possibilities in your own life based on what's in the book.
Yeah. You went out of your way in the book to be candid, almost to a fault. Not only about the people you worked with and Bill Gates, but it's admirable the level of candor and humility that you put into the end of the book. What did your parents teach you as a kid that led you to feel that it was right to write a book this unvarnished and this true to life?
I think you are faced with a decision when you do something like this. Are you going to make it unvarnished, warts and all? Are you going to tell things as best as you could recollect them? And that was the decision that I made, but it was an easy one based on who I am and how I'd been brought up, and that's just what you do. So I wanted something of substance, something that was accurate, something that was honest, and I believe we achieved something like that.
Has your candor about Bill Gates in the book jeopardized your longtime friendship with him?
I don't think so, but I'm sure there are things in the book that Bill wants to discuss, and he'll have a different slant about them. And Bill and I have had many intense discussions over the years, and we haven't had a chance to talk about the book since it was published. I gave him a copy months ahead of publication, so we'd have a head start on it. So that discussion will be a very, very intense, and he'll be very direct, and as will I.
Do you think you'll be able to move on from that?
Oh yeah. Obviously, we've gone through so many things, over the years, and my departure, his leaving Microsoft, retiring. I mean, he's chairman of Microsoft. His retiring. So many different things over the years, and we both tried to help each out in different ways over the years too, as I talk about in the book when he came to visit me when I was sick.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that his primary complaint won't be accuracy, but will be the question of why. Why did you feel it was important to tell those stories about him? What will you tell him if he asks you that?
Well, I mean, there's certain things that happened that were key moments in my life, the reasons that I left Microsoft, and I felt like I wouldn't be doing justice to my own story if I didn't tell them the way they happened.
You travel the globe, and yet much of your focus is on the Pacific Northwest in terms of your investment in the community, real estate philanthropy, sports, and in fact, you explain in the book that you prefer local investments and that type of focus because you can see the impact. What does this place in the world mean to you, the Pacific Northwest?
Well, it's home. I mean, this is home, and my mother worked in a philanthropic thrift store, pricing books. When I was growing up, we've always enjoyed the arts here and the environment, wanting to give back and help people. So it was just when I first started talking about ways we could give back with my sister, we overwhelmingly felt that a local focus was super important. So that was our very initial focus in philanthropy, and I hope that some of the things like the work with the Brain Institute and some of that research, because by nature it has a global impact, helping scientists all over the world with their research, that we're doing things that have global impact as well.
Yeah. Is there a risk on the other side that you might be too often looked to as the savior in the local community? In other words, with things like the Seahawks, people might say, well, we've got a huge problem. Let's call Paul. Is that a risk in terms of focusing your investment so locally?
I just think you need to pick your spots and see what resonates with you and what things you're excited to participate in. I mean, initially I was a bit surprised that I was approached about the Seahawks because I was already a major league sports team owner, but that's turned out to be a wonderful experience. And I'm very proud that it was a public-private partnership that enabled the building at Quest Field. It's the home for the Seahawks and the Sounders. So that all turned out wonderfully. But we do think very carefully and analyze which local opportunities make sense and resonate with us, and that we're excited about.
Yeah. About half the audience just sort of shoved a piece of paper into their pockets because they aren't going to be making their pitch to you afterward, I think. You recently went through a second bout with cancer. And you write in the book that your illness the second time has made you simultaneously more patient and less patient. Can you explain for the audience and for us, for the people who may not have read the book, what you meant by that?
Well, I think you're more patient because you realize that whenever you go through one of these treatment regimens, there are many things that are completely out of your control, and you just have to be patient and hope things work out for the best, and be optimistic and take a positive attitude. On the other hand, you realize that if there isn't a positive outcome, your time may be limited, so it makes you that much more focused on realizing your dreams and hopes, because all of our times on this planet are limited. So it basically, you're hit over the head with that idea when these things happen, and it gives you an impetus to accelerate the things you really care about.
So how has it changed how you plan to approach the remainder of your life? Will we see new things in your life as a result of that experience?
No, I'm casting a wider net, and I'm trying to move forward some of these things like the Brain Institute and trying to make them more ambitious and more successful in their scope. Not just the Brain Institute, but other things that we're working on, and to try to realize those things more quickly. And certainly in technology, it's almost true that you can't move too quickly. But things like research on the brain, that takes decades. So you're trying to plan the course of an organization that's hopefully going to have an impact 10, 20, 30, 50 years in the future. So it's all those things. And of course, on another very important note, I mean, you realize, I realized when I was 30, and of course I realized again this time when I found out that I was unfortunately sick again, that the support you get from your family and friends is so key to getting through any of these kinds of illnesses.
You said you cast a wider net. Actually, that surprised me in part because I would almost expect you to rein the net in and focus it on more specific areas where you could have a deeper impact. Why not do that?
Oh, I think you do both. I think over the last few years there was a point where I was perhaps involved in too many things, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, and you focus down because at some point, if you spread yourself too thin, you're just not going to have enough impact. So you focus down, but then if you have perhaps potentially resources but limited time to make things real, you say, okay, is there something I'm missing? Should I be doing more? And so there's so many areas, in terms of whether it's global health initiatives. Recently, I contributed some money, our family contributed some money to support animal health in the third world, gave Washington State a very significant contribution to build a facility to do that in a great way, which Bill Gates and Bill and Melinda Gates had also had given some funding previously. So you start looking and thinking about the things that you'd wanted to do for a long time, try to actualize those, and try to find a few key new things to add to your plate.
Yeah, okay. You're also very candid in the book about your feelings about or your analysis of present-day Microsoft. It's a great chapter in the book called Hellhounds, referring to the lineup of Facebook and Google and Apple and all the others that are eating Microsoft's lunch in some ways. If you were still around as Chief Technology Officer, for example, what would you do? What would be your prescription for Microsoft today?
Well, when these new platforms, the PC was a new platform, so when these new platforms come into existence, or come into existence in a very strong new way, whether it's the iPhone coming on the scene or the iPad coming on the scene, you have to recognize those and jump on the opportunity and be competitive as fast as you can. And I think Microsoft is trying its best to address those now, but they're trying to creep up on the and match the competition there that's already got a very strong presence in iPhone and Google's Android. So these new platforms are key, and you just can't. You have to have the agility. You can't miss the opportunity and let others own that opportunity. And so I think Microsoft is pulling out all the stops now, as far as I understand from talking to people there, to try to recapture those opportunities.
Yeah. So a bit of a litmus test here. Do you carry an iPhone, Windows Phone, Android, or BlackBerry?
Actually, I'm a little bit old school. I use a BlackBerry because my mother, God bless her, forced me to take touch typing when I was 16. So I got really fast thumbs on the BlackBerry keyboard. Not so much on and I send quite a few emails every day. But I'm sure at some point I'll convert to a new platform.
What might that new platform
I'm
be?
still evaluating. I'm looking at all the alternatives, and I think it's important, if you love technology, to try the different alternatives, to try the iPhone and the new Windows mobile phone is a great platform. So and Android. So I've tried them all, and they're all different. They're all interesting. But my whole thing is to try to imagine where technology is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and see where how the chips that are in the products are developing, and see how that's going to influence things, and then see how the software that's coming along is going to influence the platforms. So I think it's fascinating. And this is kind of my, I don't know, I consider it my forte is trying to understand where things are going. And I don't think you can do that without trying all the different alternatives.
Okay. Mac, Windows, or Linux?
Windows, come on.
Really?
Sorry.
Star Wars, Star Trek, or Battlestar Galactica?
All.
No. All right. Okay, in another setting I would press on that, but I think you got some fans in the audience here. Okay. On the subject of science fiction, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is the inspiration that this book played in your life, rocket ship Galileo.
Right.
In fact, I was inspired to go find it on eBay as a result of your mention. It's about teenage boys who build a rocket in the desert and blast off to the moon. And the parallels to your own life are hard to miss. What did science fiction mean to you as a kid? How did it shape your life? And how's it still part of your life today?
Well, I still read a fair amount of science fiction just for fun. I think back in those days, the concepts of whether it's communication satellites or going to the moon. I mean, in the late 50s and 60s, we used to go. I went to Ravenna School in North Seattle. And we used to wheel in a TV on a cart, and we'd watch the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, launches in grade school. I guess by Apollo you're talking about actually about junior high and high school. But so there was that love of, space and space travel was in the air, and I'll never forget. My mother loved my parents. Both my parents loved books. My father worked at the University of Washington library as a top manager there, and so I grew up around books. And my mother, working in this thrift store, she would always say, and the problem was she would price books at the thrift store. So every day she'd say, huh, and then she'd come home with a sack of books. And she'd say, well, how can you not buy a good book for 15 cents? And so though she was supposed to be selling these books, I grew up around so many books, but one time she took me to the library in Wedgwood, and I found in the juvenile science fiction section, I found Rocket Ship Galileo, and that was my entree to science fiction, and I just loved it. And I think it inspires your creativity and your ability to think out of the box and think that wild and crazy ideas are possible. And it just amazes me that I've been able to live and realize some of those wild and crazy ideas like Spaceship One.
Yeah. Speaking of Spaceship One, you obviously accomplished much there in collaboration with your team. It's an understatement. Why not continue with that and get into commercialization of space full bore? And why leave that to guys like Richard Branson? I mean, does he really deserve to ride on your coattails with that?
Well, Richard is super enthusiastic about private commercial space tourism, and more power to him. And they've licensed the technology we use in Spaceship One for Spaceship Two. If you talk about getting to orbit, you have to have a much bigger rocket. You basically take over 7 times as much energy to get a pound of anything or a person into space. So that means a much bigger rocket, a much more capable system. So I'm very intrigued by the possibilities of doing something like that, but no announcement yet. I did find that the experience as a programmer of seeing a test pilot go straight up at Mach 5 and this rocket that's been built in a couple of years and with some brand new software in it. I mean, at Microsoft, and you're developing something, you get an error message, you can say, okay, fine, let's start it again, just debug it. That's what I used to do. Something goes wrong in a rocket, it's usually there's an extremely bad outcome. So before the flights, I would have a speech in my pocket, basically saying, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a departure from normal flight and there's been a fatality or whatever. So you had to be ready for that, and that was very far from my experience. So if I do enter in something like that, I'll have to be cognizant of those risks. Those test pilots are extremely brave individuals and skilled.
You mentioned earlier the Allen Institute for Brain Science, and the potential impact of the Allen Institute may be hard for non-scientists to understand. Can you paint a picture for us of what the world will be like someday, how it will be different if the research that you're funding accomplishes what you hope?
Well, any brain research is a long-term, first I'll say any brain research is a long-term project because it's so amazingly complex and so mysterious, and we're just starting to understand the outlines of how things work, I guess is how I would characterize it. So there's 2 different aspects to the question. One is understanding how the human brain, or any brain, the mouse brain is actually the brain that we did first, set of brains we did first. How do they work? How do they function? How do they react to their environment and learn and react in novel ways, process information? It's so completely different the way a computer does, and in some of the program computers, that fascinates me. I mean, the brain was designed by evolution, so each part of it is optimized for what it does. And so it's incredibly complex. And I like to think recently about the idea of there's a complexity break that slows you down, because the minute you get into these things, you think, okay, I'm starting to understand this. Then you realize, oh, no, it's 10 or 100 times more complex to fully understand that thing, that aspect of the brain than you thought. So anyway, there's the whole set of things, excuse me, that has to do with understanding how the brain works. So that's completely fascinating as a just because we all want to understand really how do our minds work, why are we who we are, all those amazing questions, and ultimately we'll arrive at some decades from now we'll arrive at a much better understanding of that. Then there's trying to understand basically at a chemical level, at a biologic level, how the different parts of the brain work. And if you understood that and those aspects of the medical aspects of the brain, then you could possibly bring forward treatments to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, which my mother suffers from. So you're very hopeful when you do these things, like we released our data on the mouse brain, which is an important experimental animal, and now our first set of human brains, that will bring forward and make happen earlier some possible treatments for those diseases.
How optimistic are you?
No, I'm very optimistic, and the approach we've taken is fairly unique, not completely unique, but it's like the Human Genome Project, where you're trying to put a database of information online that scientists around the world can access for free, and that will accelerate all of their research. So they don't have to say, okay, genetics of the human brain, I need to start slicing up some tissue and looking at that. But that data is already online, so they can say, okay, a gene that's related to Prozac, what parts of the brain are affected by Prozac, and then if you combine Prozac with something else, you have a anyway, it can tell you many, many things, and it can potentially accelerate all of their research, so that to get to the core of the problem, so we really understand something, all these different scientists can benefit, and amazingly, and wordingly, it's become a standard tool for scientists to use that care about the genetics of the brain already.
Yeah. Speaking of the brain, let's talk about music for a second. This is a topic that I wanted to explore, and based on some of the audience questions, you do too. So I'm going to mix a few of your questions in with mine.
My band is here tonight too, but they're not playing. So just I want to be clear about that.
I saw them downstairs. They look like quite the group.
They are, but I won't get into that.
In the book, you write about the catharsis of playing music, and you talk about how you're on a good riff and your shoulders just sink in. What does music mean to you?
Well, I mean, music is another mysterious thing, but it's a form of expression. So you can play a chestnut of a blues tune, and yet when you play a solo on that, you can go to a creative place where you're just riffing in your own particular way with your own expression, and it's just a wonderful thing. And being able to, in the book I talk about meeting some of the amazing musicians I've been able to play with over time. Those experiences have, because I just consider myself a decent amateur guitar player. Some of these people are, there's a reason, a Mick Jagger or Bono or any of these people, they are extremely talented at what they do. I mean, amazing, and they can improvise, and I mean, it's an extremely creative process they go through and create their amazing works of art. So I just feel wonderful. It just feels wonderful to me to be able to jam with my band and play some songs, and then occasionally have these unbelievable experiences, whether it's just witnessing others create or actually very occasionally be able to play with them.
You tell this great story in the book about Bono convincing Mick Jagger to play Satisfaction, to sing Satisfaction as you play. Can you explain how Bono pulled that one off?
Well, he's a clever one, that Bono. Well, it was Mick. A friend of mine was throwing a birthday party for Mick, and I had brought a bunch of equipment that we could have kind of an improvised jam. And I asked Mick a couple times, Mick, you feel like playing? And Mick, he just didn't seem into it.
It's like, nah, like that. Is that what he did?
It's his birthday party, whatever. So then I go to Bono. I said, "Hi, Bono, I don't know what to do. Mick doesn't feel like playing, but it might be fun." He says, "I know what we'll do. I'll sing his song really slowly, and he'll have to sing it. I know he'll have to sing it. So we start playing Satisfaction, and Bono's singing it really slowly, and Mick starts to look nervous, like something has gone wrong in the universe. That's my song. This has to stop. So he went and grabbed the microphone, and he's singing Satisfaction, and I'm playing the main riff to Satisfaction, extremely nervously behind him. And then when the song was over, I look over at Bono, and Bono goes. Told you. And so that was a fantastic little interlude there.
What's your favorite guitar?
Oh, I play what was Hendrix's favorite guitar is a Fender Stratocaster. It's an electric guitar, and it's not that easy to play. But if you can get your technique halfway decent, then you can make some amazing sounds and feedback and everything else come out of it. I was fortunate to see Jimmy play here in Seattle twice. I think he came 3 times. Once at Six Stadium, I think once at Key Arena, and those, my first concert actually was at Key Arena, and that was a mind-blowing experience for I guess I was 17, something like that. So that was from one. So I was another Seattleite. I was kind of at the feet of trying to learn some of Jimmy's things, and for years I would play along to records without any help, trying to how the heck does he do that? And so year after year I would slave away, because I probably as a teenager at some point I thought, well, I could go into programming or music, programming won, but I never stopped playing, and so I kept slowly shedding my way through Purple Haze year after year. And so after 25 years, I could play a half-decent Purple Haze. And it was funny to talk to his bass player, Noah Redding, and I'd say, what was it like? What was it like, when Jimmy would come in? He'd say, he'd come in after, one night, and the next day he'd come in, he'd say, here's this song called The Wind Cries Mary, and, I wrote it in about half an hour, and here we go, let's record it. And I'm going it took me 25 years. 25 years.
So it's remarkable that a lot of engineers, actually, software engineers, are musicians as well. It's an interesting correlation. And there's other similarities too. You're sort of in a band of other programmers, and so in some ways you were part of one of the greatest bands ever. It was called Microsoft.
We had our hits. We did. So, few in the top 10 there, I think.
Yeah. So, on this topic, how did you and Dan Aykroyd become friends?
Dan was introduced to me by a mutual friend, and Dan is just a wonderful performer, loves and has an encyclopedic knowledge of the blues. What a creative mind. All those, I remember watching him on Saturday Night Live when Microsoft was in Albuquerque. I'm just amazingly creative and talented writer and actor and everything else. So I love him. He's just a great guy. It was funny when 60 Minutes was shooting over on Mercer Island. We had a little jam, and Dan was nice enough to come up and was playing harmonica, and we're jamming along. So afterwards, Leslie Stahl goes, but Paul, you're not as demonstrative as Dan Aykroyd. And I'm going but he's he's a blues brother, and he's been doing it, he's been doing it for a long time. And I'm just a kid from North Seattle. But Dan's just wonderful.
You explain in the book, shifting back a little bit to business here, you explain in the book that one of your abilities, one of your knacks, is to see what's next, to piece together different things that are coming up, dating back to your early days, reading the early hobbyist magazines, and piece them together into one big idea and recognize that that's the thing you need to pursue. Why haven't more of your ideas since Microsoft seen more commercial success?
Well, sometimes you can be too early. That's one possibility. There's many ways. Having the idea is not sufficient. You have to have a great team of people. You have to be able to execute and realize the idea. You have to be able to convince people to try out the idea and market and sell it. If you're involved in big companies, there's financial aspects you have to be very, very cognizant of to make sure everything's in good shape financially. So I talk in the book very directly about all the different ways things can go wrong, of which there are a few. So so that's just, but that's part of the, if you're creative and you try things and you're a risk taker, some number of those things are going to fail. Now, if you read the book, you'll know some ways to avoid those things, the failures. So I hope. I'm just joking.
No, but
kind of.
You did help to create one of the most successful startups in the history of the world. What have you learned through that experience and through your more recent experiences about the most important ingredients for creating successful businesses? Well,
again, I mean, the first thing you start with is the idea. And to get to the idea, my approach has always been just, it may seem a little random, but it's just to stuff your brain with as many ideas, as much information about, in this case, computer chips and software, kind of as your brain can stand. And then I'm just lucky enough to every once in a while I'll see a connection between two things, like microprocessor chips and software, and in this case, the BASIC language, which is just what Microsoft's first product was. So you have to have the idea, then you have to find the team, and I was lucky, to meet Bill in high school, and we met another guy at Harvard that could write the math part of BASIC, and so we had a team there that churned out that first BASIC in under 2 months, and then I flew out to Albuquerque with it. So that you have to have the right team, and then you have to, there is definitely some luck of microprocessors, the marketplace. The Altair computer was there, and we had a customer, and the next thing you knew, we were off and running, and then everybody wanted our BASIC. So all of those factors come into play.
Yeah. Since leaving Microsoft, your primary focus in business and technology has been as an investor. Did you ever consider, or would you even consider today, picking one of your ideas and making a comeback as a day-to-day chief technology officer?
No, I really leave the development of programs and those things to people that are familiar with how to implement things these days. My knowledge of implementation, although I could get back in there and ask some really tough questions, but it's, which I do.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I do is I try to ask the best possible questions I can. But Chief CTO, no, but I do look at user interfaces. I've always felt that was a really interesting way to add value. So I do look at those things, and people in different organizations that I've spent time with will tell you that just the craft of technology, if you follow it through the years, is a place you can add value.
Have you ever pitched Bill Gates on the idea of starting a new company from scratch?
No, Bill was, when I first left Microsoft and I started my first company post-Microsoft, Bill talked about investing in that, which I mentioned in the book. But no, I think, Bill was very, very, once he decided to retire, he was very, very focused on philanthropy and what he was going to do there. And I really laud everything he's done there with global health and what he and Warren have done together. The scale and the ambition there is truly breathtaking, and I root for all those efforts to succeed, to eradicate different diseases and so forth. And we've collaborated on a few things in some of those areas.
A film, right?
Yeah, we did a documentary. I did a documentary on global health that Bill funded. And so forth. But it's I think it's hard to go back to those halcyon days when you're in your early 20s and I'd come into work and Bill would be sleeping on the floor with his feet sticking out the door of his office, and I have a lot of nostalgia for those days. I've gone back to Albuquerque and revisited those places. And if you do go back to Albuquerque, there's a wonderful exhibit we helped to put together in the Natural History Museum there called Startup, about those early days.
Yeah. Now, you and Bill, this is an audience question. You and Bill started at a time when the microprocessor was being revolutionized into the next generation. What do you see as the next evolution or revolution? And it doesn't specify a subject area, but is there something along those lines coming up that you see as equivalent to the revolution of the microprocessor?
Well, equivalent to the microprocessor, no, that was a radical change, both well, basically in the performance you got for a very low price. Suddenly, I mean, all of a sudden, people could buy a computer that could do something for $1,000, and they did. So that was amazing. I think when I look to the future now, I think of both these new platforms that I already mentioned, the smartphone platform and the tablet platform, but I think of where software can be 10, 15, 20 years from now, and how we can build more artificial intelligence and things like that. I think recently people have seen with Watson that won the beat human players on Jeopardy. That's an example, but not the only one of the way forward. We have another project we're doing at Vulcan called Halo, which is trying to encode the knowledge in a biology textbook into software, so you can ask questions. It's very, very challenging to do some of those things. So you can't, things that ambitious, you look at a very long time frame to actualize them. But there's so many exciting areas. I mean, just look in the last 5, 6, 7 years, social networks came from nowhere.
Yeah, you're on Twitter. What do you think of Twitter and Facebook and all that?
Well, I was thinking, the other day I was thinking, I should send out some tweet like as kind of a joke saying, bitter billionaire retires, this is my last tweet. Look out, Howard Hughes, going to Vegas today. No, but
nice.
But
yes,
I just don't like iStation Zebra that much. I can't see my. That was his favorite movie. He just sit there watching it over and over. Anyway, I just can't see it. No, but I think anything where you can follow, people that are sending. I think the most interesting thing about Twitter, for example, is people will send you links to things they find interesting, articles, and so now there's starting to appear some things that will show you all the articles directly of things that that kind of tastemakers and people that follow technology. I mean, if you look on my Twitter account, you're going to see, people everywhere from comedy to technology to science. It's a pretty broad range of different things. So I think that's a great way of helping you aggregate, stimulating knowledge and trends and things like that. And then you have things like, then you have Facebook and the other sites like that are more about staying in touch with your friends. We're such social animals that it's amazing if you think about it, why wasn't something like Facebook done years earlier? It could have been, and there was nothing stopping that from occurring. It's just you have to have the idea. So there's always things that come down the pike that you don't expect that suddenly affect all of our lives in a great way. And I think that's one of the wonderful aspects of technology.
Yeah. You talk in great detail in the book about interval research, your lab in Silicon Valley in the 1990s, and that's been in the news of late as well. Why is it important for the industry, why is it important to you for the industry to recognize intervals work now and for you to be compensated for its intellectual property?
Well, I think, the things that happened recently, we've basically looked at different ways to license some patents that we had from the times that I invested in Interval, and I think there's some very interesting ones there to a number of different companies. But you almost always get involved in litigation. And there's litigation. I think today, didn't Samsung sue, was it Apple?
Both. Apple sued Samsung and
they sued everybody. So I think it's just a little unusual for an individual, maybe, but these lawsuits are extremely commonplace. So that's really all that's happening.
Yeah. Do you feel there's a risk of damaging your legacy by coming back now and suing all of these? I mean, the list of companies, not to play Leslie Stahl here, but the list of companies is Google and Apple, and I mean, it's a long list of very prominent companies that you're taking on.
I think that has more to do with the applicability of the patents, but it's all in litigation, so I'm not going to say any more.
Okay, fair enough. Some of the audience questions focus on an interesting topic here for the local community, and that's South Lake Union, where Vulcan's development has completely transformed the neighborhood. It's been really remarkable, and then to see Amazon.com move in as the anchor tenant. And the question here from the audience is, after South Lake Union, what is yours and Vulcan's next real estate venture?
Well, that was pretty unique because we, I was very excited to support the Seattle Commons initiative and loan that initiative the money to acquire a lot of those parcels. And unfortunately it failed, and so the property came back to me, and we just felt there was a future in biotech and many other burgeoning areas to revitalize South Lake Union. And it's wonderful to have not only biotech and the University of Washington Medical School and Amazon and many others. That area of Seattle has really come to life and is doing well. So that's a very rewarding thing for us, and it's also obviously turned out to be a good investment. So a lot of times the best things you do in investing is have a good outcome where it's not just the investment, but there's also a benefit for the community, and I feel like that's what's happening in South Lake Union.
Do you ever get a chance to walk through it, ride the trolley through it?
I haven't ridden the trolley yet.
You haven't ridden the trolley?
No. Do you recommend it?
Well, I mean, it's a trolley.
I was always more of a monorail guy myself, but
That's right.
I'm happy that the Experience Music Project is down in that area too. That was an amazingly interesting and rewarding thing. We just opened our Nirvana exhibit recently, and
Come on, you can give it up for Nirvana. That's all right. Yeah.
So I love EMP. I mean, not everybody liked the architecture initially, but I hope it's grown on people. I don't know. I consider Frank Gehry to be one of the true original architectural geniuses, and my sister really pushed his selection, and she was right, and I kind of prodded him like guitar bodies, really swoopy and wonderful, and what an amazing job he did, I think.
Yeah. One of the audience questions, I have no idea what it means, but it's just intriguing enough that I feel obligated to ask it. Thank you for the remix of the Last Waltz. What's your favorite song from the show? Can you explain this to me?
Well, the Last Waltz is a movie that Scorsese shot of the band performing their goodbye performance.
Okay, that's right.
And one of my friends, Robbie Robertson, is the guitar player for the band in that movie. So it was remixed at one of my studios, and so I think it's a reference.
Yeah.
I think "The Shape I'm In" is one of the songs I like.
Is that your favorite?
So it's up there, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I took a date to see it in 1977. I think that dates me a little bit. Sorry.
I was playing back in my own mind where I was at that point and having a hard time.
Gets a bit foggy back there, doesn't it?
Speaking of dates, you actually mentioned probably the first love of your life in the book, Rita.
She's here tonight.
And I believe Rita's husband is sitting next to her. Tell us about Rita, Paul.
Well, obviously I talk about some of the wonderful times that Rita and I had in the book, and And one funny incident, which I guess has gotten surprising amount of attention, but was unusual at the time, Rita cooked a very nice dinner of, I think it was baked chicken, and Bill attacked this chicken with a spoon. And after dinner, Rita came to me and said, "Can you believe he ate it with a spoon?" And I said, I was a little surprised too. But it was great chicken.
So you've stayed in touch?
We do, yeah. We have a meal a couple times a year, and it's wonderful to stay in contact with your old friends and acquaintances.
Tell us about your yachts.
They're too big and there are too many of them. What do I need? Do I need to say anything else? No. I mean, I think that I grew up, seeing films like Silent World, which is a Jacques Cousteau movie about his wonderful diving saucer and all these adventures they had underwater. So the biggest yacht that I have basically accommodates a submarine. And what these guys do, these captains, they'll say, "Paul, we know you want to build a bigger boat, and here's a model. It's about this big, and the submarine goes in the back here, and it's going to be pretty good sized, and and then they start building it, and you go to Germany, you see it, and you go, oh my gosh, that's really big. No, it's enormous." And but we've been able to have adventures. We recently did a trip to Antarctica, which was fabulous. Although it's disappointing to see. It turns out that the poles are disproportionately affected by global warming. So the scientists are happy to show you, here's what the ice just in the bay that you're anchored in looked like 20 years ago, and here's how half of that ice is gone completely in 20 years. So for all those that say there is no effects of global warming, or it's just seasonal variation or whatever, you go to the poles, or you can fly over Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever, it's happening. It's happening. But anyway, we've had wonderful adventures on the yachts, and I love to scuba dive. And if you have the crazy success in some of these things that I've been fortunate to enjoy, you think about trying to realize some of those dreams, and I guess the yachts are one example of that. And then some of my friends, they just rent the yachts; they don't own them. So, but if you own them, they're a lot of fun, and I had great times on the yachts.
In the submarine?
Yeah, it gets really, it turns out if you go 1,000 feet down in the ocean, it's really dark. And the animals are really strange, but if you put on some Pink Floyd, it's fantastic.
I don't know quite how to follow that up. You mentioned...
Go a different direction.
Yes.
Away from the yachts.
You mentioned climate change,
Right.
and that is one of the subjects of the audience questions. What ideas do you have, and what money, _money, will you target at climate and energy problems?
That is I've been asking myself that question for probably certainly for the last 5 years, if not the last decade. And we've done a few things we've done a few things in solar and some other areas. It's a very hard problem because the problem is so huge. And if you go to China and talk to the guy in charge of Chinese research reactors, he's like, yeah, we're going to build 8 reactors, then 16, then 32, and that's going to be a lot. And so that'll help us slow down the growth of our carbon footprint. But we're also building like 50 and then 100 coal-fired plants, and you just go, oh my gosh, how can you stop that? Now, some people have radical solutions for geoengineering to try to geoengineer the planet to stop global warming. But we have to get much more serious about this. I wish I had a magic bullet, but it's incumbent on us all to think about how we can try to slow and stop global warming. Otherwise, the planet's going to fry.
So if you did something, what would it be?
Well, I think you have to look at creating clean. You have to look at creating clean energy, because clean energy, energy demand goes up every year, and for us to, unless we change our lifestyles dramatically, it's going to go up by percentages every year. And you have countries like China and India, just to name a few, that are industrializing so fast, and their energy demands are growing so fast that it has to be addressed. Otherwise, we're just on a slippery slope to this real deterioration in global climate. Actually, Rita is an expert on this area, so afterwards you might want to ask her a few questions. She probably knows more about the different initiatives even than I do.
Another audience question. Your Allen telescopic array is searching for extraterrestrial life. During Stephen Hawking's lecture on life in the universe, he said the chance of finding other life forms was infinitely greater than finding intelligent life forms in the universe. What are your...
That's optimism.
What are your realistic expectations of what might be found?
No, I years ago, just in a very unusual way, I was approached by Carl Sagan because the government was cutting off funding for listening to radio signals from outside the solar system, possibly of extraterrestrial origin. And so at that point it was like, are we going to keep trying to listen? And I thought it was a very worthy thing to try to keep listening. I mean, it is is it 1,000,000 to 1 shot, 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot that we actually...
Billions and billions.
Billions and billions, yeah. Hey. That was good. It's a very, very long shot, and if they do hear something, they're supposed to call me. But my BlackBerry, nothing. It's not even vibrating. So it would be, imagine how all of our lives would be stimulated and changed if there were other societies out there beyond our solar system. But it's a very, very long shot. But I thought it was worth it. And the telescope array is used for conventional radio astronomy, actually more than it's used for SETI. So it's a very inexpensive way of doing a large radio telescope. So I think technologically it was interesting too.
We're getting into some of the audience questions that I would characterize as wacky, but let's go for it. If you saw a penny on the ground, would you stop and pick it up?
What year? I have to say I might leave it for the next person to pick up.